people are writing about specific to OCD and general anxiety disorder and PTSD, as was the readings for this week, or was it last week, as well as going back to my DSM-4 to see what evidence would suggest that this could be the case, and looking at some of the major differences in terms of DSM-4 to DSM-5 in terms of diagnosing anxiety disorder. I'm also sifting through some of the research on what does a diagnosis really entail, what does it constitute, and how do we do that with confidence and some degree of specificity. And I'm doing that through reading a lot of articles on anxiety and just other resources beyond our reading, watching videos on treatment of anxiety, and I just wanted to throw that out to the group today.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious because I'm fascinated by this topic as well, Adam, and trying to figure out some way to kind of combine aspects of neuroscience with treatment for anxiety. And I'm wondering, from your readings, have you come across anything about, because I don't know for sure, I don't know about this, but I'm trying to imagine that with anxiety, that it has something to do with like an active or an overactive sympathetic nervous system, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And does that translate into any particular patterns about like neural firing in the brain in certain areas, like more in the limbic system or stuff like that? I'm just wondering if you've come across any articles or readings that have had any patterns that they've discovered.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've come across a lot, and here's what I'd like to structure my paper around, actually. I've seen articles discussing the genetic role of anxiety, which indicates that anxiety is a risk factor. And this definitely lines up with the diathesis stress model. So if we're born with an ability to get anxious, and we learn about it, how to be anxious from a young age, then all we really need is a really dynamic stressor that puts us over the edge. I've seen articles that talk about the disorder itself, not only as a direct disorder, it seems like, that it really is, there's a basis in anxiety and it leads to other types of psychopathological symptoms, but also indirectly too, so it could be as a comorbid factor. So to give you an example, like there's a growing body of literature on sport-related concussion, and what they're finding is multiple concussions lead to longer recovery times, and it leads to more or a higher chance of developing a comorbid anxious profile as well. So we're learning how to be anxious, first of all, when our brain is having to fire at a higher rate. Like electrically speaking, this would be the beta brainwave. However, the brain is able to operate at a lower rate, such as delta or theta, which is closer to sleep. There's this metabolic and electrical mismatch when it comes to that, and the concussion really sparks it. I've also just looked at a few articles which is really symptom-based. So anxiety is less about, let me rephrase, the genesis of anxiety is less important. It's more about the maintenance of anxiety. It's the maintenance of psychopathology over time. And this could become, for lack of a better term, our comfort zone. So for a lot of people, it's comfortable to be anxious, and they want to stay there. Maybe they're at their best when they're a little bit anxious, when they're a little tiny bit imbalanced chemically, so to speak. So it really depends on what we're looking at, and there is a deep ocean of research on a lot of these different topics. I'm seeing it as as part of a mediator variable, as a moderator variable, as an accelerant to psychopathology. This is more the risk factor. There's a developmental period, going through traumatic experiences socially during puberty. There's research on that and how we can learn how to be anxious. I think the biggest part of this for my paper is being able to just summarize some of these major things, keep consistent with this vision that I have, which is just write about the clinical utility of neuroimaging. And then, I don't need to write a book on this. I don't need to be the foremost expert on anxiety, but I tell you, it's quite variable. You have to really know who's writing it and what their project is really in line with.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Adam, the one thing that you'll want to do in the paper is to critique the articles that you have used. So it's not just a presentation of the data.
Right.
Okay. As long as you know that.
Great.
Really good.
Thank you for the reminder. That's good.
Okay. Anne-Marie, you're up next.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. Adam.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure I have anything as prepared as Adam did. I decided to kind of take a closer look at borderline personality disorder. And specifically, I was intrigued in reading about the three core dimensions, which, for just offhand, there are emotional dysregulation, their impulsivity, and interpersonal hypersensitivity. And so what I found most interesting in reading about those was the confusion around the construct of emotion dysregulation and how that at times can be confused with the actual borderline personality disorder symptom of affective instability, and that there's really a difference between the two. Did I scare Stephen away? I see that he's left the conversation. And that a lot of kind of misunderstanding.
I'm so sorry, Anne-Marie, to interrupt. Can you repeat that? I missed that last piece.
I was just talking about how there's a misunderstanding with the emotional dysregulation, kind of that core dimension with the borderline personality symptom of affective instability, and that there's actually people find that to be they confuse that, is what I'm trying to say, and that the affective instability actually has to do with the reactive moods of the borderline individuals, and that's where that confusion comes from. And so then I was thinking more about looking at kind of the, maybe not misdiagnosis, but kind of looking at bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder and kind of what distinguishes the two, since there can be a confusion between this construct. And so I found that what really differentiates bipolar disorder from major depression is the shifts in the affect actually result more from internal cues, and so I found that aspect interesting. Something else that I thought was kind of interesting was that the literature was talking about looking at, rather than emotion dysregulation, calling it that as a core dimension, possibly labeling it as a negative emotion dysregulation. So that would actually include the affective instability, the anger, and the emptiness that is experienced by the borderline individual. I don't know how much everybody wants me to go into this, but that's kind of really where I focused a lot of my reading. I'm very intrigued by borderline personality disorder. I know I've mentioned in previous go-to meetings that I work with the post-adoptive population, and the kids that we deal with come to us that have experienced severe trauma, and I'm very intrigued by looking at the correlation between the children that we see in our office and those who go on to then unfortunately carry a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And so kind of to piggyback off of what Adam was talking about, I may want to take a look at writing about this for the larger paper that we're doing. The class and I will throw a question out there if anybody has ever worked with these types of individuals, or if they know of any place to kind of go for in the literature linking children and adolescents who have had trauma histories and linking that with borderline personality disorder.
Well, Anna, I work with borderline. I've worked with quite a few. I currently work with court services right now, and the kids, at least generally the females that we get, have lots of trauma and exhibit, even though they're teenagers, so we don't diagnose the borderline personality. They exhibit many of those symptoms and criteria, and they definitely are a fascinating group to work with, and they definitely keep you on your toes. As far as readings and stuff, I like Milan writes a lot about borderline personality, and he may be somebody to look up. I don't know as far as connecting between the childhood trauma or not, but I like the way he conceptualizes borderline personality, which is very similar to what's in the DSM.
Do you have a spelling of his name? Is it M-A or
Millon.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, that was one of our papers. Okay.
Well, borderline personality disorder is one of the pets of the psychiatric community. That is that the amount of literature on borderline personality disorders is more than just about anything else at this particular time. And it partially may be the way that it's structured within the DSM.
Dr. Ruffins, could you explain that a little bit more? What you mean by it might be partly because of the way it's structured?
It is structured by category, of which you have to have 3 from column A and 4 from column B, and you have to be 18, and there's all of these types of restrictions on diagnosis. The other thing is that what if you have 2 of one thing and 5 of the other instead of 3 and 4? Then you get the second most diagnosed category, which is the personality disorder NOS, not other specified. So you find great large groups of people, particularly children, who have diagnoses other than borderline personality disorder, who actually probably would be better fit under that particular conception. Another thing that we have to be careful about is the new rise in bipolar disorder. And when I say a new rise, what I say it to mean is that there's a greatly increased number of people suffering from bipolar disorder as written in the DSM. And it's about the diagnosis itself. That is, that when when managed care stopped allowing hospitalization and other things for people with access to disorders, the access to disorders simply became an axis 1 disorder. The borderline personality disorder turned into bipolar disorder. And so it shows that at this particular time, diagnosis is run as much by the insurance companies as it is by anybody else, by what they will fund and by what they will not fund. Okay, any other questions for Anne Marie? Thank you very much. Okay, Blake, you're up.
Okay, well, that was a good segue, I think, into what I was wanting to look at or talk about today. I was kind of delving into, I've had more post-traumatic stress coming across my desk here of late, so I kind of centered on that. And more specifically, the section that kind of caught my eye was the section that says what counts as a traumatic stressor, and how that's kind of changed from the DSM-3, 4 to 5. And I took a class with Dr. Holland in the Minnesota cluster on prolonged exposure, and we had a lengthy conversation about, because he works in the VA, and how there has to be a traumatic event, otherwise you can't diagnose PTSD. So, for instance, somebody that watched the World Trade Centers on TV, that does not count as a traumatic event, yet they have all the other symptoms. So they would not be able to bill that to insurance. They would not get reimbursed for that. And I don't know, I had a really problem with that. And so I kind of looked into the way the DSM-5 reads, and it is, you can hear about a traumatic event of a close family member, but watching it on TV doesn't count. I've had a kid here recently, actually, he watched a scary movie. I can't remember what it was now, but he had legitimate PTSD symptoms from just watching this movie, but I can't diagnose that because he watched it on TV. So I guess I just wanted to kind of bring that up today to the group and kind of hear what everybody else thought about that, because that to me seems, I don't know, I have a problem with that.
Actually, Blake, I concur with your concern about that. When I was reading through the diagnosis and the criteria, I was curious about how they determined that just observing something like that would not be considered traumatic if a person had the symptoms from observation. So I was just curious about who, again, makes these determination of what the criteria would be for a certain illness or disorder.
Right, I had kind of the same thought, and I posed the question to Dr. Holland about, one thing that I also don't see is that there's no time limit as far as and what can constitute as an event. So, an event could be 1 second versus what if a whole tour of duty? Does that count? Even if they can't pinpoint, well, this day when this bomb went off, I'm having PTSD. What if it's the entire thing? Does that count as an event? I think there's so much interpretation in that. And he, according to him, he said he wouldn't be able to diagnose that necessarily unless we could pinpoint a specific event in that tour that is causing the stress, not just the whole tour. And I don't know, I find that maybe that's something that needs to change. Maybe there needs to be some kind of okay, this is what constitutes an event. But I agree with you too, is that you're still observing something, whether it's through TV or not, you're still witnessing it, like with the World Trade Centers. They played those things for what seemed like months, over and over and over. That traumatized a lot of people, even though they didn't know anybody in there. They just watched these, and I just find that troubling.
I had the opportunity to work with a number of patients who were in the World Trade Center on that particular day. And I also had two patients who were blocks away, but were affected by the smoke and didn't see anything, but were uh, affected by the amount of smoke and dirt in the air. And they seemed to carry all of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But again, it was not able to actually diagnose it as that.
So did that affect? I mean, I'm, this comes across as like it's all about billing, but you know, that seems to be what kind of runs things. Insurance companies, well, you know, how are things getting paid for? Did that affect their treatment? What could you provide them? Things like that?
Right? No, because it was the owners of the building were the Port of New York and New Jersey Authority, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and they paid for the psychiatric bills for any of their employees who were in the building that particular day, and they didn't focus in on uh, particular diagnosis.
Okay. But I'm wondering if, let's say that that was through a VA or something like that. If I mean, I would think that that would really affect the billing. You know, if it was covered, what kind of treatment could they get that exposure therapy that's quite effective? I don't know. If they can't write down those words, post-traumatic stress disorder, you know.
One of the things that one of the untold things about people who had PTSD and were in the World Trade Center that day is the trauma of being unable to speak to their families about it. If you remember that day, by about noon, everybody had been turned into a hero. It was a event met with heroic uh, heroism all around. When the reality is that people trampled each other, people pushed each other aside, people did all the things that you would imagine people did in that particular situation. But we have never, as a society, accepted that this is anything else but the 400 firemen and policemen, and the 2,000 whatever hundred people who died. And these patients, therefore, came back to their homes to speak with family members who were already into the heroic aspect of it. And many of them felt completely unable to speak their story. It's the same thing with young airmen who have been serving in Iraq or Afghanistan. And there is a tendency for them to begin to act up about a month before it's time to go home. And that's partially because they can't speak about what went on there. Primarily, we're not interested. And secondarily, they don't want to traumatize anybody. So it gets stuck inside of them. Okay, thank you, Blake. Charlotte, you're up. Okay, we put her to sleep. Charlotte, I think that you're muted. I think you've muted yourself.
I got it. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I guess what I felt myself trying to do, think so many things to think about there. That was really interesting what you were just saying, Stephen. Um, and Adam too, in terms of what constitutes a trauma and whether it can be something that you see on TV. You know, I just saw a friend over the weekend that I hadn't seen in 12 years, and he quite surprisingly ran into her at this camping weekend party, and he had had a friend commit suicide, a childhood friend, long-term friend, a couple years ago. And over the 3 days that I saw her, some of her story came out. And yeah, I guess what I was thinking about, because I was thinking about it this morning, was, and I won't share it with you all because I don't want to traumatize you secondarily, but the way that her friend had committed suicide was, you know, left a disturbing image in my mind, and it kept coming back to me, and so absolutely, if I can hear a story about how someone committed suicide and have it kind of keep coming back to me, then I don't see why. I mean, we know that psychotherapists can suffer the effects of secondary trauma. I don't understand why, like, the vivid imagery that we're all exposed to today wouldn't make that possible as well. And then the other thought I was having is how have all these sharply defined categories, and we talk about different ways to diagnose them, and we can look at the DSM-4 versus 5 and the psychodynamic diagnostic model, and we have them all, and then maybe somewhere there's a place where they all blend back together. The Stanislaw article was talking about the stability of personality disorder, and they were saying that one of the biggest factors was that in the disorders that they looked at, which were obsessive-compulsive personality, borderline, and I don't remember the other two offhand, that there seemed to be maybe a couple of core factors that were stable over a 10-year longitudinal study where these personality disorders maybe just kind of blended into what you might call a couple factors that were the core of personality disorder, but they didn't know, they didn't define what those would be. There was another article. And I guess I started thinking about what were the overlaps between anxiety versus trauma versus people arguing about whether borderline personality disorder is also a trauma-based type of disorder. And what that would look like. And I've been reading a different book about psychodynamic transference-based therapy for borderline personality disorder. And one of the things, I might be quoting it wrong, but one of the things that they said that they thought was really important for diagnosis and treatment was not just the behaviors that people exhibit, but the way people themselves interpret their life events. And I guess I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say here, but I'm trying to make some kind of a synthesis about the importance of, I mean, if there's an underlying organization to personality, a structure down there, like in terms of psychodynamic model, don't we have to look at how people themselves interpret their life events? And then don't we somehow have some overlap there with trauma and how people do and don't process it with others? That's all I want to say about that. Don't everybody answer me at once. I can't hear you, Tam.
Oops. I said, I'm sorry that you had to listen to that and be so impacted on interestingly, is on the third degree, of separation from that story.
My husband was wonderful. He listened to her too. Actually, we felt really happy to be able to run into her after such a long time and to see her kind of clearly needing to do that and to be able to be there for her to do that. And I had worked for the suicide crisis line, and I was like, look, they have like a real support group for survivors in San Francisco. I'm going to give you the number and everything, and I do hope that she goes. But yeah, I mean, I just found it coming back to my mind, right, involuntarily. At no time that I was aware that I was even thinking about it, not feeling sad necessarily. This image came into my mind. So, yeah, and partly it's because I do care about her, and it was so painful for her, but I don't know what I'm trying to say with that. But it just seemed relevant in terms of some of the things that all of you were saying. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I can't hear you. Yeah, okay. There it goes. Okay. How, Dr. Ruffins, I've read these psychodynamic diagnostic manual after a class I took in the spring, and then I've been reading this other therapy on transference focused therapy, and it was really good, and I read the whole thing and I understood it, but they have these models, about here's the underlying structure of the personality, but they never really say how they know. How do they know that? What's their evidence for that?
I don't know what the evidence is for that. You can, I would expect, discover the underlying personality of adults by looking at not only their behavior, but their psychological makeup. And you learn about the psychological makeup within the context of the treatment.
Right. And then, like, in this book I was reading, it was on transference-focused therapy for borderline personality. And so it's like not psychoanalytic proper. And so that is why I was reading it. And so what they do is they look at the transference to the relationship between the therapist and the person with borderline personality disorder. And it was Kernberg, and at the Personality Disorders Institute, I think it's like they're the top treaters of these kind of disorders, for those of you all who are interested in BPD too. And so I guess when you have a lot of similar psychological explanations for some things from the people themselves, and you are doing research on things like common transference type reactions, then there can be a way to look at, well, I mean, they're always abstract concepts, but the underlying structure is thought of to be in terms of this conflictual identity of the self that's based on basically these contrasting or split dyadic interactions between people. And so what happens with people in borderline personality disorder is that they have these dyads that they fall into that seem to have made a large impression on their psyche, and that they treat other people in terms of those old relationship patterns. Well, I mean, don't we all, to a certain extent, right? I mean, and that's part of my interest as well, in like early childhood and family conversations. that sort of thing.
Right? But we all do that 100%.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is, what is the flexibility with which we do it? And do we do the same rigid thing each time? There are often
Right.
people who are suffering with personality disorders are stuck in their transference to other people. So as soon as they meet them, they get put in one of their categories. Now,
Right.
it may not seem logical, but there's a way in which that is an attempt at self-soothing. Because once the person can be put away in their particular box that they belong, then I don't have to be worried about them. It's when we interact that the problem arises.
Right. And so if I am in a context where I am treated with this behavior, it's like, yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. It actually fits with what we know in some ways too about anxiety and trauma and stereotyping in models. There's a cognitive shortcut happening there that the person is using to attempt to keep themselves safe. That makes sense to me.
Sure. I don't think that there's a big difference between internal representations and cognitive behavioral schema at this particular point. I mean, there is a coming toward uh, that is not acknowledged. For example, the reason why Marsha Linehan has taken over the world is that she had created a way for cognitive behavioral therapists to work with these patients. Because they would come in and they would give them homework and they would do all these sincere things, and the person would explode that they expected you to do, that they expected them to do homework. So that there's a way in which her entire structure, if you look at the structure of dialectic behavior therapy, it includes it's long-term treatment, 2 years or so. There's group treatment, and there's a built-in um, group for the therapist to process everything, which is
Right.
this is the old psychodynamic model of doing
Yeah.
it. So that I think that psychology is such a young science that we still are extremely religious about our religion. So that if you're Catholic, you can't be Jewish. If you're Protestant, you can't be Mormon, right? So that
Right.
in psychology is one of the few fields that is having so basic a fight around being helpful. You think that being helpful, everybody would work together, but it's simply
Right.
not true. It's not true because since it's a young thing, you have to. It's also a bit personality disorder-ish because when you run into somebody else, you immediately place your system on them, and if there's a negative reaction to it, it's an affront to the self.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, E.T. Charlotte. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Susan and Tam still have to present, and we have 10 minutes. I think what we might do is talk about the two papers. Thank you, Susan. And talk about any other thing that's related to the class. So let me pull up the syllabus. Okay. Your understanding of the breadth of topics in the science of psychopathology will be facilitated by your ability to address the conceptual questions below. These are a pool of representative questions from which items will be selected for study. So what we're looking for is not for you to provide us a précis of what people have said about the particular matter. But what we're looking for is your capacity to critique the matter using other work, and then at the end coming up with your own, what you believe, and be able to rationalize, but be able to support that. Now, is that half clear, quarter clear? Okay, I mean, people end up getting B pluses because what they do is they give a they give back what is already in the book. It's more like in a graduate in a master's program, they want you to be able to get the questions and know the answers. In a PhD program, it's much more they want to see what you can do about it and what your critical thinking is about the data. Not that you know or don't know the data, but what is it that you can do it with it.
Dr. Ruffins, the expectations, is that similar for the second paper as well?
The synthesizing paper?
No, the paper on the one of the.
Yes, that is the way to, well, if you're taking a course with me, that's the way to approach all of your papers. Again, you should assume that I have read the material and I know the material. What I want to see is what you have done with the material. So that would be for the second paper as well.
Will we be getting any feedback from our first papers prior to submitting our other papers?
I am hoping to, in my free time during national sessions, get that.
I know it must be a really busy time for you. I was just curious to know.
I'm going to try. I'm going to really try to do it. You're on mute, Charlotte. Now you disappeared. Okay, you're still on mute.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
We're in business.
When is the 10% other student paper synthesis due? I don't see the due date. Maybe I missed it. I didn't see it on the schedule.
I thought it was on the schedule. Let's just look at the schedule. The synthesis page is on the next page.
Oh.
Due date is August 16th.
Okay.
Regarding the synthesis paper, exactly what are you looking for as far as, well, what are you looking for? I guess I should ask. Do you want us to focus on like the first papers, the second papers, the concept papers, or a variety? What are you looking for?
For which paper are you referring?
The synthesization paper.
Oh, the synthesis paper doesn't necessarily even have to have references. It's really about what you have learned during the semester based on other students' material.
Okay.
So that's it. Then it's second paper in the synthesis. Keep wanting to scroll down your screen, Stephen.
Now there's the concept paper that you're missing, Charlotte, that's due August 9th.
Oh, which
And
one is that?
then on the next page,
On the screen.
on the next page is the synthesis. Oops. The synthesis paper due August 16th.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions that we have? But why don't we use it? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Regarding the concept paper, is there any way to kind of like narrow the focus of what we're writing on? Like, are you looking for us to incorporate some of these questions into this? I mean, is there, I
No,
guess I feel like I've got a big funnel in which to kind of narrow.
you're going to choose one of the 17.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that.
That's pretty specific.
Well, that narrows it a lot. Thank you.
Your funnel just turned into a straw.
Yes. Yes. Okay, anything else? Okay, let's think. The next time we meet, I believe, is the 27th, which is a long time away, but yeah, the next time, no, the 28th. The week of the 12th is summer session, and the week of the 19th, I'll be away. So I thought you guys would like a holiday too. Okay, so we'll meet again on the 28th. Any last?
Is it the 4th or the 28th?
Say that again?
Do you mean the 4th or the 28th?
The 28th.
Okay.
Our next webinar
Right.
is on the 28th. Why did I write Did I write April? Did I write August 4th somewhere?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
I just had it in because of the bi-weekly recurrence in my calendar.
Okay.
My mistake.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay, everybody, have a good week. I hope to meet you at summer session if you're there. And enjoy. Good night.
Right.
Thank you, Stephen.
Bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Thanks.